Hello. Welcome to the episode of the Let People Prosper series. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today is March 28th, 2023, and I'm excited and elated to have on another Liberty warrior, a happy warrior overall, who's a freedom fighter each and every day in the great state of Louisiana, but has also done a lot of work across the states. And it's none other than Daniel Erspamer. Daniel, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Hey, Vance, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, awesome. And I should note, too, that I'm chief economist at the Pelican Institute, Public Policy. So Daniel's also my boss, but we get along really well. And I'm really delighted to have him on the show today. And so let me go first for the audience and give your bio so they'll know a little bit about you, and then we'll get right into it. So Daniel is a nationally recognized free market leader. He has spent his career building and growing effective policy organizations across the country. Over the course of his career, he has mentored hundreds of nonprofit leaders, raised tens of millions of dollars for opportunity policy initiatives, and helped achieve meaningful policy wins across the nation. Since being appointed Pelican Institute CEO in 2017, he has built a team and strategy to address Louisiana's most substantial policy challenges and to create a Louisiana where everyone has the opportunity to flourish. Amen. Under Daniel's leadership, the Institute has generated policy victories in the areas of education reform, criminal justice reform, state spending, innovation policy, occupational licensing, and much more. For this work in 2020, Daniel was recognized with the Buckley Award, given annually by America's Future, to recognize leaders making strides to advance freedom and prosperity. Prior to his leadership at Pelican, Daniel served as Vice President for Strategic Partnerships for State Policy Network and in a variety of leadership and development roles at the National Office of Americans for Prosperity. He holds a BA with honors in political economy and communication from Tulane University. Daniel and his wife and kids, they all live in New Orleans, and their 4 children, 1 dog, 2 birds, 2 guinea pigs, and many tropical fish. So with all that, Daniel, and with your zoo there, what motivates you to do what you do each and every day?
You know, like a lot of us, I came into this space from the intellectual side, right? My sort of life-changing moment for this was reading Milton Friedman in college. But what motivates me every day, like a lot of us, is waking up and seeing those kids every day. I think a lot about what is the future that we're going to leave for my kids, for your kids, for the next generation of Louisianans and Americans. And so, corny as that may sound, I think all of your viewers who have kids will know exactly what that means. And, that's why we got to get up and do it. And I love the name of your show, Let People Prosper. And that's what it's all about.
Well, that's awesome, Daniel. And was there a moment in your career that was that tipping point? I mean, was it the Milton Friedman's book, which was also mine, Capitalism and Freedom? I've got to sit right back over here. But was there any other sort of life situations that kind of had it to where the light bulb came on and you wanted to go in a different direction?
Not so much a different direction, but there's a moment I'll never forget. And I was a young dad. We were living in the DC area, and this was right after, I remember it vividly, I was one of those nerds sitting up late watching the final vote on Obamacare. And I just have this vivid memory of walking into my daughter's room. She's sleeping in her crib and looking and saying, "Oh my gosh, what have we done?" This was a moment, it's one of those things that surely couldn't happen. And yet, here we were, it happened. And, I'd already been working in the space some and, was committed to these ideas. But that was the moment where it said, okay, this is it. It's time to really double down and commit. We've got to turn this around for her and for everybody else.
Yeah, that's a big one right there. I remember another one that kind of turned me in that direction was kind of the Iraq War and kind of the war situation, where I remember in one of my economics courses, they talked about, well, war creates more economic growth. That's how we got out of World War II. I mean, out of the Great Depression was from World War II. And that doesn't quite make sense, with the broken window fallacy and things of that nature. And it's interesting in our histories where we get those turning points. From your more philosophy, where you said you started with, what is kind of like your political philosophy of how people come together and institutions and things of that nature? Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I always sort of describe myself as a conservatarian. So I tend to be, closer to a classical liberal philosophy. Seems like the older I get, the more libertarian I become, which I'm not sure I would have predicted that. But on the same, maybe where I veer off of maybe a more traditional libertarian is I believe in civil society. I believe in sort of a core moral fiber of the country. The founders are very clear that this was a republic set up for a virtuous people. And so while I certainly don't believe government should be in the business of defining morals or virtue, it is incumbent upon us and sort of our little platoons and churches and community centers. And so I think, I do have a belief in some institutions, some societal and cultural institutions. And if we can provide liberty and government and a good, solid community and civil society, I think that's ultimately the answer to let people prosper.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Daniel, with your time at Pelican and moving in Louisiana and trying to make so many of these reforms, you and I, we've looked at a lot of these data that are going on, and Louisiana's unemployment rate's 3.6% right now, as far as February 2023, which sounds good. That's about what the national average is. Many economists would consider that to be full employment. But as we know, and has been digging into this, is that you've got to look underneath the hood to also note that people are moving out. The population continues to decline on net as people are out migrating out of Louisiana. And the more work that I've done with you and the team and been to Louisiana, I mean, look, Louisiana has so much going for it. It's got a great culture. It's got the ports. It's got oil and gas. I mean, there's just so much that's happening there, and Mardi Gras and tourism and all those great things. Whenever you're looking at Louisiana and doing this now for a number of years, what do you see kind of as the good and what's some of the bad that really needs to be worked on?
Yeah, you've nailed it, Vance. Let's start with unemployment. This has been, I really believe that we ought to stop reporting an unemployment rate. It is a statistic at this point that's almost useless. And the information, the data point that I think is far more relevant is workforce participation rate, right? And so this was an argument the governor and I would sort of publicly have over the last few years is, there'd be a press release touting record low unemployment. And I'd say, yeah, but look, we've got all these people not in the workforce. And, my sort of analogy on this is like the pastor taking the back two pews out of the church and saying we have record Sunday attendance. This isn't how this works. And our goal is, you put it as let people prosper. And in Pelican parlance, we talk about human flourishing. It's the same goal, right? Is that everyone should have the opportunity to pursue their vision, to pursue their dream. And so let's look at how we're doing in Louisiana, right? Not well. You mentioned outmigration. We are the third highest outmigration rate in the country. When I talk to our leaders, when I talk to voters around the state, when we're in league with New York and California and Illinois, this is not a list on which we want to be. So then, we go to our assets. You nailed it. We have 5 of the top 15 ports in the country, the most active natural gas sector, some of the most oil refineries of any state in the country. We have inexpensive land, access to water, the mouth of the mighty Mississippi. There's just no reason we shouldn't be an economic powerhouse, perhaps the most prosperous, the most flourishing state in the country. And, the other thing we look at historically, even as recently as 1960, New Orleans, Houston, and Atlanta were all around the same size. We look today, of course, and that story is very different. And it's easy to blame natural disasters and hurricanes, but that's not the story here. The story is bad economic policy, and it really goes back. We're just about to the 100th anniversary of the beginning of Longism in Louisiana. This is the political philosophy espoused by Huey Long. We've had 3 state constitutions that have supported basically the ideas of Longism. And let's remember that Huey Long's goal when he ran for governor was really one thing. It was a deeply populist agenda, and it was to punish Standard Oil. He believed that it was taking from the poor and making a few people rich and not helping everyone else. And so the entirety of longism really is based around punishing Standard Oil. And that's basically how our government is still structured today. And I guess, it's a success. It worked. It drove all the oil and gas companies out of the state. It has made us one of the highest poverty rate states in the country. And yet a very powerful central government, a very powerful set of status quo industries that really don't want things to change. So despite amazing assets, despite amazing people, despite amazing culture, people come here by the millions to play. They should stay. And, I love raising my family here. My kids love it. But gosh, if we don't act pretty quickly to reverse 100 years of longism and create a place really where everyone can prosper, we're going to reach a point where it's hard to come back.
Yeah. And Daniel, one of the things that has been kind of shocking to me, learning more about Louisiana and working on some of the policies, is the effect that Huey P. Long had on the state. One of the things that, I look at a lot are state budgets, responsible state budgets across the country. And one thing, again, that was shocking to me is that the budget that is submitted by the governor in Louisiana has a lot of clout. There's a lot of power to it compared to many other states where it's more of a ceremonial budget. Even, when I was chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, we put a lot of effort into it and everything else, but in some sense, we knew it was more of a policy document. This is what the president is saying about the future. But we knew when Congress got it, they're basically going to throw it in the trash. But that's not necessarily how it is in Louisiana, though, right?
That's right, Vance. The governor sets the tone. The governor's proposal for the budget is the budget off of which the legislature works. And really, it's only in the last 4 to 8 years, 3 to 7 years, that the legislature has maintained much independence at all from the governor. Beyond the budget, this is the first term in modern political history in Louisiana where the elected Speaker of the House and President of the Senate were not the choice of the governor. This wasn't by rule. This wasn't, in statute anywhere. It's just by tradition. The governor got to pick who legislative leadership would be. And so, it's many of the sort of vestiges of power of the Louisiana governor are by tradition. And then add to that, the Louisiana governor appoints about 5,000 people to boards and commissions every year. My understanding is, if you look at Texas, the Texas governor has something like 500. And so, this is an enormous amount of patronage, an enormous amount of power. And I don't mean that to cast aspersions. I think most governors do the best they can to appoint the right people to those. But it's just by nature of that structure, that's gonna hold a lot of power. And these boards and commissions rule Louisiana. So we've got to, there's some deeper constitutional challenges and just a ton of power by tradition and by structure that lives in the governor's mansion.
Yeah, that's right. Some other things to think about the state of Louisiana and how it ranks with other states. When you look at the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of North America, their latest report showed that, actually Louisiana ranked 20th. So it was in the top half of those states. And that's looking at government spending, tax burdens, and regulatory burdens, mainly labor market regulation, where, Louisiana has pretty low property tax burdens. Whenever you look at, things like the tax foundations reports and things of that nature. Personal income taxes has a high of 4.25%, but it's a progressive, 2.8, 3.5, and 4.25. So there is that progressive nature there. It has the 15th highest corporate income tax rate of 7 lower 7%. And so those are making it to where it's less conducive to economic growth and potential for businesses to want to move there, but also an incentive for, people move with their feet, right? One of the things in economics is we have economic incentives and people decide to move elsewhere, whether it's in Texas where there's no income tax, or Tennessee where there's no income tax, or Florida where there's no income tax. And so, I've talked to Art Laffer here recently, who always talks about how taxes have consequences, right? What have you seen in the kind of the direction of Louisiana and where Louisiana should go when it comes to taxes?
Well, that's right. We're in, maybe I haven't studied it in depth, but I suspect we're, if not the highest, among the highest mobility in the history of the United States right now. People are moving in large numbers, and they're moving all around us. They're moving to Texas, they're moving to Florida, Tennessee. They're even moving to places like Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama. We've always had sort of a Texas chip on our shoulder here in Louisiana, but now we're starting to develop one for Mississippi too, with all due respect to our friends in Mississippi. And so we're losing population while the states around us are gaining it. And the tax code, it's such a great example of how we get things wrong. Because you look at those numbers, and if you look at sort of the overall tax burden, we're relatively low. We have the highest homestead exemption in the country, which means low property tax rates. For a long time, very few residential property owners paid property tax. It's a $75,000 homestead exemption. So overall, the tax burden is relatively low. The problem is we've made it so complex and made the tax code so challenging that the rates are artificially high relative to the tax burden. We made some progress. You noted our top individual marginal rate of 4.25%. It was 6% 2 years ago. And that swap happened basically by eliminating a major deduction that was in the tax code that was just bad tax policy to begin with. But just as an example, you go from 6 to 4.25 at the top marginal rate just by eliminating a deduction. You look at the corporate rate, we have 432 pages of tax preferences in the corporate tax code alone. I always like comparisons. So I checked the New Testament in the King James Version of the Bible is 184 pages. So, we have a tax code substantially longer than all of the New Testament. It's just, these are things that ought to be simpler. And if we could simplify it, we could eliminate it. Frankly, we actually give more in tax preferences in the corporate tax code than is collected in actual taxes. So, but the problem is, if you've got a deduction, you've got a tax preference, you're hard pressed to give it up, even in favor of flattening or eliminating or phasing out an income tax. And so, and those are the industries and special interests that have highly paid lobbyists and really effective lawyers and accountants, and the little guy often gets left behind in that. So, if we look at sort of our freedom index, right, we ought to be even much better than we are, and the conditions are there to do so. We've got to do the hard things, and it means, this is the hard part, right? It means politicians who are willing to step up and say no to a deeply entrenched and very powerful status quo. And the only way to do that, at least that I know of, is to rally the voters, to get citizens to have constituents be a counterweight to those special interests. And if we can align those incentives, that's the way to get it done. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's right, Daniel. I think it reminds me of, speaking of philosophy and political philosophy, James Buchanan, economist, public choice economics, talked a lot about, rent seekers, that there are these rent seekers out there. And ultimately, politicians have to get reelected. And so there's certain handouts that are going to happen to where we get this convoluted, complicated tax codes, whether it be personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, or others, to where you're essentially trying to carve out and create situations where people will vote for you at the end of the day. And some of those could be well-intended. I'm not saying that they're not well-intended, but the best sort of economics or tax situation for the economy and for people ultimately, right? Because the economy is just people, is the broadest base with the lowest rate. And make sure that creates a situation that is supports economic growth and human flourishing and all the things that we like to talk about. The other side of this coin, though, Daniel, what you and I talk a lot about is spending. Louisiana has actually done a pretty okay job in some extent of their overall budget, but there's a lot of federal funds. I believe, they have the third most of any state. Of 44% of the budget comes from the federal government, which is really just us, whether it comes from our right pocket or left pocket. It's coming out of our pockets and those taxes that are paid. But there's a lot of dependency on the federal level, which continues to grow the budget in other ways. Whenever you're thinking about the budget picture and spending, what are some of the things that you would like to see within the budget there in Louisiana?
Yeah, you've nailed it. Some years we've been the top recipient or by percentage of federal funds. Some years, we're always in the top 5. through a mix of a variety of things, natural disasters being one of them. But it has a huge impact, right? You look, and unfortunately, I think it's not even our right pocket or left pocket. It's our great grandkids' right pocket or left pocket that those federal dollars are coming from.
Yeah,
and yet, what do we do, right? When a politician brings home the bacon, we reward them. We have a press conference and say, bravo. The incentives here are terribly misaligned, even for the right people. So, as we look at the budget, you've nailed it. Including federal funds and everything else, we've just in the last 7 years moved from 28 billion to nearly 50 billion for a state of roughly 4.6 million people. That is an absurd amount of money, especially if you've driven here. The roads are not very good, and I think a lot of people would say we're certainly haven't doubled our service output in those 7 years. Haven't improved the roads by 2 times in the last 7 years. So we've got to get this under control. So, as you've led on, Vance, looking at a responsible budget for Louisiana. Interestingly, the legislature passed a pretty good expenditure limit in 2020. And an expenditure limit actually exists in the Constitution already, just not very effective. Although we may hit it this year, amazingly enough, as ineffective as it is. So the legislature passed this in 2020. Of course, that was in the depths of COVID lockdowns. And so, winning the voters have to approve any constitutional change. And so, there we were trying to win a constitutional amendment vote without being able to get out on the stump and work and rally people. So it was narrowly defeated with a very difficult set of ballot language as well. So it's very confusing for people to understand it. But that's part of the solution. We've got to constrain the growth of government, make sure it's not growing faster than population. Again, we talked about it, net out migration or inflation. And, up until the last couple of years, inflation's been relatively flat, relatively low. And yet, again, we've almost doubled the state budget. So if we can get those things under control, here's the other thing about the Louisiana budget. We have these things called dedicated funds, and other states may have these too. But when legislators walk in, if you think about that $50 billion budget, legislators control only about 10% of that. So when you walk in to the Appropriations Committee meeting, or those lawmakers walk in to vote on a budget, the federal dollars, of course, are already accepted with all their strings attached and dedicated to wherever they're going. The legislature has taken action through our Constitution and through statute to lock up other funds. And, I always say this, it's just hard to imagine if you were running your household budget or running a small business based on a budget where 90% of it was decided by your crazy uncle 50 years ago. Think about the things we pay for now, the things that are priorities now that didn't exist then, whether it's the internet or a cell phone bill or a Netflix subscription or, whatever it may be, that didn't exist. And so if we had to live off of the priorities from 50 years ago, we wouldn't make good decisions. And that's where we are now. And so when we have an up year, we just spend. And then when we have a down year, and listen, we're an oil and gas and a hospitality economy. We have big ups and downs. And so when we have a down year, there's nowhere to cut. No easy place to cut, I should say. There's plenty of places to cut, but no easy ones, because the things that are most popular are often the things that are not locked up in the Constitution. And so we have this ratchet up effect over time where it's really created a mess that we've just got to get out of.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the landscape, the institutional framework, because institutions matter, right? And getting the taxes and the spending and the budget right are going to be so important, because you need those fiscal rules, those guardrails to make sure that we're heading into a constitutional direction, not things that are getting government and things that they shouldn't be in, which is one of the great things that I think we're doing and are doing at the Pelican Institute. And we just released, this comeback, Louisiana's comeback agenda. And what I'll put in the show notes page at vanceginn.com, or you can find it at vanceginn.substack.com. But there are many more good ideas that are in there. When you're thinking about giving every kid a school that fits, enhancing public safety, creating jobs and opportunity for all, modernizing the tax and policy and budget responsibility, and embracing technology and spur innovation, reduce regulatory barriers. I mean, all these things are about human flourishing and really getting Louisiana back on track, the comeback agenda. What are some of the things that really get you fired up about this session that starts, and the early stages of it, and what will happen during that session? What gets you fired up, Daniel?
Oh man, and this is so interesting because our session starts much later than most other states. We get to look around and see what everybody else did and see what we can try to replicate. But the thing that really drives my passion, it always has, is education policy. And we look just this week, Texas has passed, or excuse me, Florida has passed a universal education savings account. Georgia seems to be on the verge of doing so as well. This fight is going on in Texas. The chairman of our House Education Committee has introduced the Sunshine Scholarship accounts, which are universal education scholarship or education savings accounts. Listen, I mentioned at the top of the show, we've got 4 kids. I know you see this with your kids too, when they just all learn differently. And that means the same school, the same teacher, the same environment that works really well for one kid doesn't necessarily work for another kid. And all of my kids are so far, knock on wood, have been pretty high achievers. They've done really well in school. But that doesn't mean the same thing is going to work for them. And they have great educational opportunities. So at the end of the day, it's really critical that we allow every family and every parent and every kid to find the right fit for them. And that may be a traditional public school. It may be a magnet school. It may be a public charter school. It may be a private school. It may be a homeschool. It may be a co-op. It may be tutors. There's all of these opportunities. It may be, it may be a Montessori environment. And it may be something we haven't even thought of yet. Even just the last 3 years have brought incredible innovation into the education marketplace. These kinds of programs that allow dollars to follow the child to the educational opportunity of their choice, that's going to spur even more opportunity. We're spending about $13,000 on average between state and local to educate kids in our traditional public schools here in Louisiana. Some of them are exceptionally good, but at the end of the day, our results are not. On aggregate, we're at the bottom of the list on reading, on math. We have 10,000 kids a year on the college track who require remediation when they get into our colleges and universities. We're not preparing kids well enough. And a lot of that just has to do with making sure our kids are in the right place for them. And so I'm incredibly excited. I think we're seeing this moment of education freedom sweeping the country. Louisiana has got to get not only on that train, but out in front of it. We've been a leader in education reform a long time. It's time to do better, and it's time to help our kids prosper and our kids succeed.
Yeah, amen. And it's quite fascinating too, Daniel, to see. We've got the school choice revolution that's going on across the states. You've got the flat tax revolution that's happening across the states. I think we're going to start seeing the responsible state budget revolution across the states. These are, and within this system of federalism, this laboratory of competition that we have, it's extraordinary to see, to your point, what works and what doesn't work. And I agree with you. I think that we're going to see things come up that we have no idea within the education space, because we have a limited amount of knowledge. And Hayek, another one of my favorite economists, talked about the knowledge problem, right? Where individuals up within government, or just a few individuals, don't have the knowledge of the full marketplace of innovation and entrepreneurship that can come out throughout what's going on. And we need to be instilling those ideas within our kids. And too often, we're not seeing that just in one type of, if it's a government-run school or other types of schooling. To your point, you really need to fit whatever the needs are going to be for those kids, for those families, and really empower parents to ensure that they have the opportunity to do what's going to be best for their kids. One other thing that I wanted to touch on, Daniel, as we're wrapping up here, is I know you're also passionate about the technology space. And what we're seeing with kind of, the antitrust issues of the Federal Trade Commission and Lena Khan and what's happening there in DC. But we're also seeing some states, talking about this with social media bans for minors and other things that are going on. What are some of your thoughts in this space on the technology sector?
It's it's really concerning as you look at this environment. So let's just zoom out for a minute, right? The place in our economy that's had the most growth, that's created the most jobs, that has spurred the most entrepreneurship has been this technology space and the innovation space more broadly. And I started arguing this about 15 years ago, that if we didn't, as free marketeers, as free enterprise believers, really get out ahead of this, that the government would want to get its grubby little hands all over that sector of the economy too. It has traditionally been the last bastion of free enterprise, for all of its faults and all of its benefits. And we have seen in real time, I love this graph that shows the dominant social media or digital platform over time. And it's this animated thing we see creative destruction. We see all of the components of free enterprise playing out right before us. And so it's no surprise that the Biden administration, FTC, that big government progressives are eager to regulate, to get involved, to try to stop innovation. That's their playbook, right? And so it's no surprise that we see big government now trying to get deeply ingrained in this space. It's also no surprise that we see some of the leaders of those industries and companies trying to cozy up to big government. This is Atlas Shrugged all over again, right? There's no surprise. This is the way this typically works. The surprise and the concerning thing is to see our fellow conservatives and conservatarians try to get in that same space as well. And I argue with my friends across the country all the time on this, that the things that are being proposed are the things that the other guys do. Our job is to make sure that free enterprise can flourish, that and again, I said it at the top of the show, but that we have civil society and churches and community and family that provides the counterweight to the negatives that we see in any opportunity, any innovation. There's nothing that's unadulterated good. There's good and bad to everything. So this is something that's really important. We've got to get out ahead of this. We've got to stop our friends who are trying to use the power of big government to put their ideas into the marketplace. Let's let the market flourish. Let's let people prosper, and let's let people have the opportunity to succeed or fail on their own merits. And that's how we're gonna really drive the economy to the next century, the next generation. If we continue to act the way we've been acting, we're going to find another industry to ruin and find another place to turn the country backward.
Yeah, well put, Daniel. Well put. I mean, markets work, governments don't. And government has some roles, but these aren't the types of roles they need to be in. We need to be empowering parents to do what's best for their kids, whether it be their schooling or their social media or whatever else it is. I don't want bureaucrats to be telling me what I need to be doing with my family. So I think you're right on there. Daniel, just the last couple minutes we have here, what else would you like, to tell the audience, or anything else about some of the stuff we talked about today, or anything else?
Yeah, Vance, thanks again for having me on, and it's a great pleasure to get to work with you every day. You and your colleagues and our team are just fighting the good fight. I'll maybe end where we started, which is, or where you started. Be a happy warrior. Life is short, and there's a lot of serious things happening. And make no mistake, not everything is fun and funny. But we have the right ideas. We have optimism. We have hope, and real hope, right? And real change. And so I would encourage your viewers and listeners to go about this work with a good spirit. Debate is a good thing. Engage the other side in good spirits and in goodwill, and be willing to engage and debate and persuade. We do it with a smile on our face, and we do it with all the hope and optimism in the world. That's how eventually we're going to really move the ball down the field. And it's important that we win, for sure, but it's important that we live life. One of our culture principles here at the Pelican Institute is the idea of joie de vivre, right? The joy of life, the joy of living. And so I encourage everyone listening and watching to just to have a great day, find somebody to smile at and be optimistic with, and keep fighting these fights, because we're on the right side, and we are the people who want to let people prosper. And let's invite as many folks as we can to join us in this effort, and that's how we create the movement that's going to win the day.
Well, amen, Daniel. And I know that you're doing that each and every day as you are a happy warrior. There's going to be a lot of good things happening in Louisiana and across the nation because of the great work that you've done and are continuing to do, and that we're going to continue to work together on. There's a lot to do. And so I really like the way you finished that up there. For the audience, if you like this, please give us a 5-star rating. Tell others about it so they can listen as well. There's a lot to do, and we're going to keep doing this at a happy warrior way, as Daniel put it there. Until next time, let people prosper.